It's a pleasure to be here with all of you for this second day of the second energy transition colloquium for this year. We had the first day yesterday with a set of speakers, and then we have another day today, half day today, with an additional speaker. Before I enter into the introduction, I would like to give the floor to our Associate Dean, Dr. Duncan Lorimer from West Virginia University, Eberly College of Arts and Science. Thank you very much, Duncan, for being here with us.
Yeah, thank you, Paolo. Welcome, everybody. My name is Duncan Lorimer, and it's a pleasure to serve West Virginia University as the Associate Dean for Research. I'm here in the Eberly College of Arts and Sciences, as Paolo said. My home department is in physics and astronomy, where I'm a professor. For the last 3 years, I've been serving as Associate Dean, and we're a large college here in Morgantown, and we span the gamut of disciplines. And our goal is, not only to serve the people of the state, but we're providing a liberal arts education to our students, and we typically award around 2,000 degrees to students each year. We have a lot of talented faculty who work across these programs. There's about 20 different disciplines in the Eberly College. Together we carry out research and scholarships with our students and in the community, and in a variety of disciplines, ranging from things like astronomy here to social work, and really all things in between. We have a vibrant humanities set of departments, world languages and linguistics, philosophy. We're also very strong in the social sciences and sociology and psychology. And recently we've initiated a program of data science, and the geography within the geology and geography department, the Center for Resilient Communities sits, as I'll mention in a minute. So as Associate Dean, I have the pleasure of working with many of these faculty. There's over 250 of them who are really active in these areas, and we help facilitate the scholarship across the areas. And like, as I mentioned, we serve our students and the people of the state of West Virginia. So we're rooted as a land-grant university in the mission. That's our mission, to serve the people of the state. But as we're doing today, we work frequently with people across the US and internationally as well on projects that are truly global in nature and transcend geographical borders. So Professor Farah in the Department of Public Administration, which is now part of the Rockefeller School of Policy and Politics here in the Eberly College. Paolo is leading by example in this area, and he's one of our interdisciplinary researchers, and he works with colleagues across the college, and he facilitates what we call the Eberly College Interdisciplinary Research Collaborative on Global Challenges and Local Response Initiatives. And that group brings together scholars from many of these fields that I've just been mentioning to seek and address problems carried out through research projects and scholarly work like this event today, to discuss matters that really impact all of humankind. And also, so that's one of the sponsors of this event as part of the Eberly College, and co-sponsoring the event today, but not present right now, is my other colleague, Professor Bradley Wilson. Bradley is serving in the Department of Geology and Geography here at WVU, and he currently directs the WVU Center for Resilient Communities, and that's one of our flagship research hubs here in the college, and that's co-sponsoring the event. And the conference that we're all gathered here today for focuses primarily on energy and its relationship to our environment and a changing climate. I just want to mention also, there's a couple of other projects going on within the Eberly College that are quite closely related to what we're discussing today, and also examples of these collaboratives that Paolo is leading in the global affairs. So we have two other collaboratives. One is concerning climate change research, and the other is devoted to research in the issues of public health. Both of these topics are extremely relevant to the citizens of West Virginia, and so they lend themselves really well to our land grant mission. So the climate change, the former topic, is experienced, by the citizens here primarily through catastrophic flooding here in West Virginia. And the latter, the public health, is really brought into sharp focus here in West Virginia through the opioid epidemic, which is particularly acute in our state. And so we seek research solutions to all of these topics that are grounded in science. And so now, really more than ever, getting towards the topic of today, as the world's population, continues to rise, and sources of energy, are really crucial to continued economic development. It's important for us to seek solutions to big problems that are playing a role here, like climate change, and look through both a scientific lens, but also a perspective that results in the implementation of effective policies across the globe. So the talks and discussion planned throughout the day really serve as a great starting point for this, as they did yesterday. And I'm really glad that both Dr. Farah and Dr. Wilson are hosting and facilitating these events, and I'll be trying to tune in as much as I can. I'm looking forward to these discussions. So without further ado, I'm going to turn the floor back to Paolo, and I wish you all a very productive and successful discussion today.
Thank you very much, Duncan. Thank you very much for this introduction. It's very helpful. It's frame the work we are doing in the bigger picture of our university and the college. So it's very much appreciated. And also the reference to the Rockefeller School, this initiative, that it's really another way for bolstering multidisciplinarity in public policy and actions as well. I would say that's part of the land grant mission, beside all the research initiatives. But this and as well, I also really appreciate not only the co-sponsorship, but really the co-organizing role of the Center of Resilient Community with Dr. Bradley Wilson, because this conference has been shaped differently in this second edition compared to the first edition that was pre-pandemic in 2019. We had the first one, and then was scheduled the second one in 2020. And then we perfectly know everything what has happened in the last 2 years. So with the pandemic, we couldn't have the in-person event, and we had an hybrid form in April and this event online. So now we are in this new normal of having online events, and it's working and being very beneficial for our work. So the conference has changed, I say, because the collaboration of the Center of Resilient Communities, we have really stressed even further the combination of global and local, which is one of the most important angle of this interdisciplinary collaborative on global challenge and local response initiative. So with the collaboration of the center, the previous workshop colloquium in April was really dedicated to the renewable energy transition in the Appalachian, and we had as well a continuation of this contribution with additional presentation yesterday with a combination of global aspects. The ones of today are going to be really focusing on the global and international perspective. So that's very important, because I'm very much convinced that you cannot solve local problems without having in mind a global perspective. But at the same time, you cannot solve global problems if you are not also experiencing and understanding the local necessities and the local characteristics. I also would like to mention and thank the additional co-organizer and partners for these events. So beside the West Virginia University Department of Public Administration as part of the Rockefeller School of Policy and Politics, and the WVU Center for Resilient Communities, and the Collaborative on Global Challenges. Also, we had received support from the American Society of International Law, the Interest Group on International Environmental Law, and the Interest Group on Intellectual Property Law, and also Global Law Initiative for Sustainable Development in the United Kingdom. So those partners has helped in promoting the call for paper, because as many of the speakers of yesterday and today, they came out from their submission as of their abstracts, and so they were selected for presenting. And then we had also combined with additional direct invitation to additional speakers to balance the event in a specific direction we wanted to drive. So those organizations has helped in the promotion of the call for paper and everything. And they will continue to help after the end of this event in the promotion of the circulation of the recording. As it happened for previous events, these events are recorded, they will be made available, and they will circulate. Now, without any further delay, I would like to give the floor to the first set of two speakers. The first one is Dr. Imad Antoine Ibrahim from Qatar University, for the Center of Law and Development, who has also supported as well this event in the promotion, in the marketing of this event, specifically this second day of this second energy transition colloquium, so the second day of the June session. So it's a pleasure to have Dr. Ibrahim here with us presenting, and then the second speaker will be Beibit Shangirbayeva. I hope my pronunciation was fine. And so I will start giving the floor to Imad, and then Beibit will follow. And Beibit is a faculty member in Gumiloyv, Eurasian National University, Department of International Law in Nur-Sultan in Kazakhstan. The paper of Dr. Ibrahim will be Energy Transition and Sustainable Development Goal SDG 7, a legal appraisal in the context of the MENA region. And the second paper will be on Nexus between extraction of natural resources and political reform, a case on Kazakhstan, under this panel on facilitating energy transition with an international and comparative perspective. So I give the floor immediately to Dr. Ibrahim, and thanks for joining us today.
Hi, thank you very much for this. All right, so I'm going to share my screen right now. Share current slide. Right, so the entire idea of the paper is concerning SDG 7. Upon looking at the Sustainable Development Goals that are 16 or 17, I was trying to figure out exactly what is the legal implementation of these goals, given the focus on my focus on energy transition. So I focused on SDG 7. So in this article, I'm trying to understand, okay, we have this SDG. What does that mean in practice legally? How can we implement it in practice? Take into consideration international law, international conventions, practical state capacities in terms of domestic legislations, financial and other, let's say, personnel who can help in this implementation. So this is the idea of the article. And to more or less work on that, I chose the MENA region as an example, because they were trying to implement this SDG for the last 5 years, and they submitted their review reports to different institutions concerning the SDGs. So we're going to try to understand, in theory, what is the legal implementation, and in practice, is it actually happening or not? So what is SDG 7? It focuses on ensuring access to affordable, reliable, sustainable, and modern energy for all. The idea is to ensure energy transition for all, everywhere, globally, and to reduce energy discrimination. It falls under the idea of energy justice. which we hope we're going to reach at one point. So since its adoption in 2015, progress has been made towards achieving this goal. Unfortunately, the progress is not enough, which how we're going to see later on. But one has to keep in mind that it's not easy. There are too many challenges, which needs to be addressed. So how do we implement this goal in practice legally? How can the law help in the implementation of SDG 7? Well, first, let's have an overview on SDG 7. The SDG has at least 6 to 7 targets. Each target has specific indicators. So I'm going to take here an example of target 7.1, which repeats exactly what the SDG is about, ensuring access to affordable, reliable, modern energy services. Now, to measure whether this target has been implemented, there are indicators. Well, the first question when we try to implement this target, what's the percentage of the population who reached access to electricity? The second one, what's the percentage of the population that has clean fuels and technology? Based on that, if, for instance, at the state level, let's say a state commits to implement this target, the state has to provide information concerning, well, what's in that regard, what are the information or the kind of information needed to understand whether they reached or were able to reach the objective in terms of access of the population to electricity or provide provision of fuels and technology. So this is the idea. So that's one of the targets. There are at least another 5 or 6 targets that are there. But this is just to give you an idea how to understand and measure whether this goal has been implemented or not. So what's the relevance? What's the importance of this target? Well, it is considered as one of the most important targets in terms of law and energy law. Why? Because so far we don't have a lot of international energy law because this field is underdeveloped. So it's seen as a shift from hard targets, hard law, to more or less soft law form, which we're going to discuss later on. And we're going to discuss the difference in the nature between international energy law and the nature of SDGs, which are more or less as aspirational goals. So it's in this context that this SDG is seen as a way to shift from focusing on international energy law and giving states binding commitments, because so far states are not willing to be bound by international energy law ideas and regulations for the single reason that is energy is still seen as a domestic issue, and at the same time energy is a very sensitive topic. Moreover, this SDG is connected to other SDGs. For instance, SDG related to poverty or to climate action. So its implementation leads to the support the implementation of the rest of the SDGs, at least plenty of them. And at the same time, that its adoption pushed states as well to start addressing this idea. How do we adopt policies and strategies to address the targets we mentioned earlier, for instance, target 7.1 on ensuring access to modern energy services. So this is the overview of the SDG. This is its relevance. So what's happening now in terms of implementation? Is this SDG being implemented correctly? And would we reach the target of as stipulated in the SDG agenda by 2030? Unfortunately, despite all the developments that took place, and despite all the progress made, we still lag behind the goal, because there is a gap in terms of electricity access and clean cooking access, and more investments are needed in terms of energy efficiency and renewables. This is obviously more difficult for developing countries than for the developed countries, although the developed countries are still also lagging behind, not all of them. Hence, we have this goal, we have all these hopes. We see the overview, its relevance, but in terms of practical implementation, it's not clear that we will be able to reach it by 2030. So how can the law help in that regard? Before understanding or trying to understand how can the law help, the first question we have to ask, what is the legal nature of this SDG? Well, the first thing is to look at the connection or the interplay between SDG 7 and existing global regulatory frameworks. So the first field is, I will discuss, there are other fields as well, but the first field I will discuss, for instance, international climate change law. States are bound by international climate change agreements, such as the Paris Agreement. Within the Paris Agreement, there are provisions concerning energy transition. So in a way, there is an interplay between global regulatory frameworks and this SDG. So the implementation of the commitments versions under the Paris Agreement helps in ensuring the implementation of SDG 7. This is one way SDG 7 interacts with a global regulatory framework, such as international climate change law. Then there is international trade law. There's an entire conversation taking place concerning trade and clean energy technologies. How to ensure that climate change or clean energy can be traded or disseminated to developing countries, while at the same time respecting international property right rules and not hindering innovation. That's another topic that has been happening or discussed in the last 20 years. To make sure that this SDG will be implemented, we have to make sure that this technology is actually disseminated while international trade law is being respected. How to strike a balance for the time being remain unclear. The third idea, or the third global regulatory framework we can discuss, is international human rights law. In the last 10 to 15 years, conversation is taking place concerning the adoption of a right to energy or energy access. Some even discuss the idea of a right to electricity or right to renewables. So if we adopt at the international level a new right, like the right to energy, what would be the impact of this right on the implementation of SDG 7? For sure, it's going to constitute a push, but would that actually really provide that kind of push or not? That take into consideration that recent adoption of other human rights, like the right to water, did not actually lead to the practical implementation of this right. These are some of the examples of national global regulatory frameworks that play a role and are interplayed with SDG 7. Other global regulatory frameworks include, for instance, international investment law. So the first thing we saw, the relation between SDG 7 and global regulatory frameworks. What are the legal obstacles facing the implementation of SDG 7? Well, SDG 7 is related to energy transition. Energy transition means implementation of binding commitments at the international level concerning sustainable energy. Yet, international energy law related to renewables remains underdeveloped. In fact, international energy law as a field remains underdeveloped. So that's a problem. How can you discuss binding commitments? How can you force states while you don't have actual binding commitments beyond the climate change agreements? This is one challenge. The second challenge is related to the terms used in SDG 7. So upon reading the targets and the indicators, there was a conclusion, like the scholars came to the conclusion that these terms are actually vague and unclear. How do you implement this target? What is the actual proportion that we need to implement by 2030? How do we track that? These are not clear. Finally, and in the best case scenario, when let's say a state wants to implement this SDG and is on board with this implementation, and they adopt domestic regulations. These domestic regulations may be inefficient, or they simply lack, or simply they might not adopt them. Because there are many other practical issues that must be considered: financial, technical means of the state, role of the judiciary, rule of law. All these must be taken into consideration. So these are the legal obstacles facing the implementation of this SDG. So we started with discussing, checking an overview of the SDG 7 and current implementation. We discussed its legal nature, so its interplay with existing international rules, and what are the legal obstacles or challenges. Now we're going to try to see that in the context of all the SDGs, because SDG 7 falls in the general framework of the Sustainable Development Agenda. Well, the first thing we have to look at is the interplay between SDGs and international law. International law is seen as a means to provide sort of normative framework for the implementation of the SDGs. The example we provided concerning the Paris Agreement is one example where implementing the provisions within the Paris Agreement concerning energy transition will help, for instance, in the implementation of SDG 7. There are other international conventions related to other SDGs that have similar situation. Yet the problem is that when drafting the SDGs, the drafters followed the same nature of international law. International law is fragmented due to the technical nature, due to the immersion of various different topics. So you have a fragmentation, different global regulatory frameworks. Each one has its own set of goals, rules, even tribunals sometimes. And when framing these SDGs, this resulted in a situation where the interconnection between all of them is not really considered. And the international community started considering this interconnection only later on through specific studies, papers, and instruments. So that was a mistake in this regard, following international law, the fragmented nature of international law. So this is the first idea, how international law interplays with SDGs in general. And this is relevant also for SDG 7, but we had to see it from in the general nature or framework of SDGs. So if SDGs followed the nature of international law, and well, that led to a fragmented nature, and this is a problematic. What was the main purpose of the drafter of the SDGs? What was the main purpose of these goals? Well, the rationale for its adoption is the following. We have a problem. We have either binding regulations or non-binding instruments at the international level. They are not being implemented. So we need something as an alternative. The alternative was the SDGs as a form of global hybrid governance. Instead of putting binding ideas and binding instruments, we focus on goal settings and stakeholder engagement. So in a way, we aspire, we hope that these goals will be implemented, but at the same time, these goals are not binding. And they may change over time. This is sort of a push towards the states to be encouraged more to implement these goals. And as such, SDGs by some scholars is seen as an alternative to binding international law, given the goal-oriented nature of its goals. Now, if this is the situation, are the SDGs being implemented legally? Well, there are various factors that play a role in the successful implementation. And for instance, as I mentioned earlier, states' capacity, financial capacity, technical know-how, political situation, military conflict, these are some of the factors that one has to consider or take into consideration. In the same time, the agenda itself, there is no strategic advice or there is no holistic goals that are clear on how to, or even guidance on how to implement these goals. So even the SDG framework in general also has challenges in terms of its implementation. Now, one important mechanism created within these SDGs is the follow-up and review framework. So we don't have binding targets, we don't have binding instruments, we have aspirational goals. But how do we make sure that these goals are being implemented? Well, within that resolution for the creation of the SDGs, the international community or the drafters of the SDGs created something called a systematic follow-up and review framework. These frameworks are voluntary and country-led. So each country decides that on this year, I will provide a follow-up and a document where I say in this document, this is my progress in the implementation of these SDGs. And this document is then seen by the international institutions reviewing and supervising the implementation of the SDGs. Based on that, you could track, or we could track the state's progress towards the implementation. This is the closest we got into a sort of binding, non-binding situation where we could track a state's progress. And this is happening more and more within the international legal sphere, where we adopt what we call non-compliance mechanisms to push states to comply with international regulations. Similar mechanism exists, for instance, in the Paris Agreement. The idea is to sort of help states, push them, encourage them, even take their hands to implement these goals or these binding targets without telling them, without ordering them to implement them. So would that work in practice? Would this kind of follow-up and review framework lead to an actual implementation of the SDGs? To do that, we will have to look at certain cases. And in this article, I looked at the MENA region, because plenty of the countries of the MENA region actually submitted their own follow-up and review framework. So how do you do that? How do we track that? Before discussing the use of the review framework and mechanism framework in the Arab region, I'm just going to have a very fast overview on SDG 7 in the Arab region. Well, progress has been made towards the implementation of SDG 7, yet we need more progress, more investments, more awareness concerning electricity, clean cooking, renewables, and energy efficiency that are still lacking behind the targets of 2030. Upon analyzing and discussing the documents, so if you go on the SDG website, you could see each, there's a specific place where you could see all the countries that submitted all their review and follow-up documents. I tracked them all. So far, you had 21 countries out of 22 who submitted their, they call it the voluntary review mechanism. Some countries submitted twice, others submitted once, others are expected to submit in 2023. The only country who did not submit so far was Yemen. And so you go on these websites and you check these documents. So I went and I checked, for instance, for the state of Qatar, for Lebanon, for Egypt. And upon checking these documents, I've seen there are plenty of issues that came up. The first thing is a state, it's a voluntary document. So a state can or may or decide on not to actually submit it. First thing. Secondly, a state does not have an obligation to report on all the SDGs. And indeed, within the documents, states actually reported on the SDGs that they thought they made actual progress in this regard. Third, there is no way to check whether the information provided is correct. And the only way to do that is to compare this information with the notes of civil society organizations, which will take a lot of time every time this is done. So it's not clear at this stage whether this is sufficient. But at the same time, it's better than pushing states toward the implementation of binding targets. So at least states have to do work. And one could see that actual, or at least state awareness concerning these SDGs, including SDG 7, are being made through the documents presented. Now, only time will tell whether this review and follow-up mechanisms in the context of non-compliance mechanisms that are being created as a procedures or provisions within international law will indeed be extremely efficient in terms of implementation of SDGs, including SDG 7. But for the time being, this SDG 7, this review mechanism serves as a reporting and awareness mechanism, at least upon the analysis of the reports. And based on this, I could conclude and say, in terms of legal implementation of SDG 7, the closest mean to understand whether it's being implemented or ensuring that states are working towards its implementation is through this review and follow-up mechanism. Yet it's not sufficient, but it's better than trying to push states to be bound by international law obligations, that especially in terms of energy, because it's a sensitive topic. Thank you very much, and I'm looking forward for your comments and feedback.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ibrahim. Thank you, Imad, for this presentation. We will move on to the next speaker, and then we will come back with questions and comments during the roundtable. So I would like to give the floor now to the second speaker, Professor Beibit Shangirbayeva.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Splendid.
The floor is yours. The floor is yours.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. I'm so happy to meet you and new people. And to be honest, the topic is also new for me, but it's heart-touching topic for me because I worked as a lawyer at the oil field companies. And so it was for me very difficult to see all the problems that I saw that is happening with the environment, that is happening in the relations between people themselves and between the indigenous people and business relations, etc. So I was so how can I say, impressed in a bad sense, and I thought, no, how can I do something useful for my country that will move forward the situation there. So I went to study theory. Maybe I thought maybe from theoretical background I would be more beneficial. So then, the Kazakhstan is a very rich country with oil resources, and we had 30 years of the rules of the first president Nazarbayev. Yes, we are extremely grateful for his contribution to our statehood, but I think nowadays we really faced problems when natural resources are not kind of the ultimate how can I say them, treasure of the people. It is just one of the means of subsistence that the economy should be diverse, etc., etc. So then I simply watched all this time what are the situations in the oil-rich places, and so then what kind of strikes usually are going on. And the most of time we usually hear the most kind of impressive, the most powerful ones. And there are so many ongoing small strikes that you would never see it in newspaper. So in newspaper you will see only the most difficult ones. So just to know them, recently we had a referendum on making amendments to the national constitution, and so it is now it's called the Second Republic is building in Kazakhstan with our new president. He came to presidency in 2018. And he is actually a person who has an excellent reputation in international arena because he was a deputy head of UN office in Geneva. And he was for a long time Minister of Foreign Affairs, and then he was a chairman of the Senate of Kazakhstan. Now, at the beginning of his presidency, Mr. Tokayev, for us it was kind of weak presidency. We understand that all the economic benefits belong to the first president, or at least to his family members. So this is, in my paper, I wanted to see how this oil field strikes in oil fields places influenced on further political reforms. When I was writing that abstract, we didn't know we didn't know what kind of exactly amendments will be in the constitution, but I see that all my internal kind of the thoughts they were replicated in the amendments. So this is for the first time in Kazakhstan statehood we had a nationwide referendum that brings amendments to the constitution. During the presidency of the first president Nazarbayev, we never had referendums that makes amendments via referendum. So it is for me one of the for me respect of the people's opinion, and the most important thing that I think Tokayev tried to get public support. As soon as he became a president, he told about the political initiatives: first round, second round, third round, and fourth round. And so I think he tried hard, and he wanted to gain recognition of the people, to gain his support. Because he's a very intelligent person. He has everything, he was not so much interested in, getting personal benefits. I think he's a person of international level, how can I say them, enough so from a very intelligent family, and for us he is a gifted person. Yes, it's better to say. So I tried to see how this how their access to natural resources or being settled, when the economy of a country is settled on extraction of natural resources, how it is how then influenced on the political reforms. So there, as soon as Tokayev, when he became a president, he started to think about human rights and the political leadership, and to think about them how to listen people and many other positive actions. So then I think the situations that happened, if you know, in January we had violent events. So my paper is based on that case when in Almaty there were clashes between different groups. From my point of view, it was a group between different political groups, at least two of them. And so then the peaceful protests, they were killed, and our president recognized it. Unfortunately, it was not maybe so much necessary ones, but the country had a really unrest in January. So why the country came to that unrest in January 2022? Because it started from the protest in West region, in West Kazakhstan. As you know, the oil and other resources, oil and gas resources are mainly located in the west of Kazakhstan. And so since 30 years, there were so many protests, and it's a culture of protest. And so they say people go to the street and they demand and they sit peacefully. You know, they act in a very legal way. So very legal way. The first a strike, it was a very large strike. It was in December 12-20 when in Zhanghaozen. So when people in the street, they demanded equal salary. So equal salary with, to be honest, with foreigners, because they have more privileges, and people, indigenous people, they've really faced and still face their racial segregation. So this is kind of to know. And as an international image of Kazakhstan, people, when I studied abroad a lot, I received my PhD degree in Pisa, and so I'm happy to see them, to see Luigi Mario Riccardi. So when I was in Italy, people had kind of impression about Kazakhstan, that country is so rich and so they're welfare country, well-being country. But in fact, we are simply extracting the natural resources and giving to the world powers like Russia, China, European Union. And so unfortunately, this brings to the pollution, to the environment pollution. So, but when I had experience in Sweden, so with a really strong belief in countries that if we have natural resources, it's a very, it means that we are rich. No, when I went to Sweden, abroad, to Europe for the first time, I was a witness of them very nice presentation when people say the scientists say that having a natural resource doesn't make rich country, and because the people simply rely on nature and they don't make any other efforts to for their social and economic well-being. So it was my first kind of impression. I thought, really, what can we receive back? So all these questions, they were in mind of people who were in the street in the protest. And what really, after all this, during all these protests, when I listen to YouTube and other videos, I hear not only that it's not a question of salaries, that indigenous people, they receive much less and they do the same job, but they receive much less than foreigners. So then it is more also the demands also were political and requesting I think, diversity of economic income. So going back to my writings, what I wrote, I think I would say that Kazakhstan is a landlocked country of Central Asian region, and its economy is based mainly on the extraction of its natural resources. 99 elements of the periodic table have been identified in the country. So there are oil, gas, and uranium. As per British Petroleum Statistical Review, by the end of 1220, Kazakhstan was placed 12th in oil reserves, 21st in gas reserves, and 8th in coal reserves. Kazakhstan's oil reserves were estimated around 30 billion barrels. Gas reserves were estimated around 1.3 trillion of cubic meters. Coal reserves were about 33.6 billion tons. There are 56 uranium fields in the country located in South Kazakhstan. So the oil and gas located in the west and the uranium is located in the south. So the country ranks second in terms of export uranium reserves, and there are 56 uranium fields in the country. It is estimated that there are 1/3 of world reserves of uranium, which are enough for 100 years. So we have all these things that natural resources that we should care about natural resources, that that we should care about the environment, etc. Everything was written in the constitution, and the subsoil use should be done by ecologically safe means and measures that prevent pollution, etc., etc. So if we take them law in books, and it is ideal. It is ideal. So then, during the 30 years of Kazakhstani statehood led by Nazarbayev, there was a constant stream of strikes, mainly in Western oil regions. The most recent protests in Western Kazakhstan were sparked by the sudden increase in price of liquefied natural gas. People protested against the collusion of oil and gas companies, which belonged to the family of the first president, and flow of indignation swept the country. And as a result, this brought about major political and constitutional changes. So then, so what I want to say, that it's not just what we read in newspapers, that just people against of the rise of price to liquefied gas. The people understand that the main companies which rule the oil and gas resources in Kazakhstan, and even not only extraction of them, but also their transportation, they belong to the branch of families, and so the family of the first president, and so they regulate all these oil prices. So it's not just simply against the prices, but also the management, state management. So Kazakh traditionally, they're really sensitive to natural resources, in particular to land, and also nowadays and to the resources that come from the land. So then, so the people associate themselves with land. They think that they have a duty to transfer the land and its resources to future generations with integrity. So this is kind of also spiritual reason that why there is a strong strike. A protest in the western region of Kazakhstan, Zhangozhen, in December 2021 and early January against fuel price hike were supported by other regions. So the question is not just it was in one small region. It was also sparked by other regions. So it had more political implications. And the economic demands in the West switched to political demands in other regions of Kazakhstan. So the peaceful country demanding economic equality faced unprecedented protest on 2nd January 2022, and this brought to violent clashes between different groups, killing of peaceful protests and passers-by, looting and seizure of the public buildings and objects of strategic importance. And according to President Tokayev's view, these were terrorist attacks supported by foreign forces, and the peaceful protests in the west of the country were used by the different political forces in Almaty in their struggle for power and influence in the oil-rich republic. Backed by CSTO forces, it's Russian-led forces, the legitimate power of the country represented by President Tokayev gained victory in power distribution. According to official information, around 230 people were killed and 1,000 were arrested. The companies that work in the field of oil extraction, which are called as quasi-public sector, were led by the first president's family. So then what kind of victory we have now? I mean, what kind of new wave? So as I told at the beginning of my presentation, now we have amendments to the Constitution. Constitution are amended with very nice provisions. So the amendment to the Constitution in June 5th prohibited for the relatives of the president to occupy any post of political civil servants and heads of quasi-public sector. In line with new amendments, paragraphs 3 and 4 of Article 43 of the Constitution has the following content. For the period of duration of the powers, the President of the Republic should not be a member of political party. Close relatives of the President have no right to occupy any post of political civil servants and heads of quasi-public sector. So this is, I think I will close my speech with these achievements in not only in political sense, but also in legal sense. And one of the amendments that brought to the Constitution that land and other natural resources belong to the people. This is a second victory, I think, in the legal sense. So now we can see how the peaceful protests in the West, they brought to political changes in the country and also legal changes of very crucial importance. Due to these legal changes, I mean, Constitution, now the post of kind of ombudsman, we call it the Commissioner for Human Rights, is established at the constitutional level. And instead of Constitutional Council, as we had before, now we have a Constitutional Court. So we are expecting much more interesting events in the country. So I hope that everything will be I hope that we'll have less strikes in the West and we'll have more political, how can I say, activation, new political climate, I would say, new active citizenship of a new style. So thank you so much for your attention. I hope that I was not, I didn't bore I hope that it was interesting for you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for your presentation. Actually, it was perfectly in time, by the way, both you and Imad. So we have now indeed some time for questions and conversation. So I would like to open up actually for everyone already, for the speaker of the next panel who are already there. So Dr. Zvek, Luigi Maria Ricciardi, and also Professor Erika Baker, if he wants to be part of the conversation as well, please feel free. So I would open up immediately, and I can see that Professor Baker is raising his hand, so I would give him the floor, and then I will add also my questions, but let's start from Larry and then anybody else on the panel. For questions just for, of course, these two presentations, and then we will have a second round after the next two presentations. Thanks again.
Well, thank you so much. And I'm sorry I'm not going to be able to be here for the whole thing, but fascinating discussions. I've got questions for each of the speakers, and I'm going to go from the last speaker to the first speaker. Kazakhstan is a very interesting context in the sense that it is drawn both to Russia and to the Russian orbit, but also increasingly to China through its participation in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and as a critical member of the Chinese Belt and Road. And that might produce some tension in the way in which SDGs are understood and implemented, especially when you're dealing with Chinese companies and Chinese-rooted supply chains. And I was wondering if you can talk a little bit about energy and energy transition for a country like Kazakhstan that actually sits between two increasingly opposing camps. If you view the Russia and then West as one set of energy transition sensibilities, and the other is the Chinese. And then the question for Imad, I think what I found really interesting about SDGs in MENA was that in large sense, when you were talking about Egypt and Lebanon and the like, I was hearing the Norwegian state enterprises, and European state-owned enterprises, in the sense that there's very little difference, I suspect, and maybe you can talk a little bit about this. There's very little difference between the way in which OECD states through their sovereign enterprises are approaching the issue of compliance with the Sustainability Development Goals, and what we see countries, especially in the MENA region, doing, that is by privileging and strategically using some of the SDGs over others, by a sort of haphazard or strategic or instrumentalized use of data gathering and data presentation and analytics. And I'm wondering whether there is at some point in this context some overlap or some discussion or some networked or interlinking between some of these public-private European enterprises and their sensibilities and the way in which MENA countries are now approaching the issue of the strategic issue of the SDGs. Thanks.
Thank you very much for that. I know there is a question also for Imad immediately, but I have a quick question for you as a follow-up. You can be short. You don't need to enter into too many details. But yesterday we were speaking about China, the Belt and Road, and Professor Bakker were referring to about the Green Belt. I'm just curious to hear from you what is the perspective from Kazakhstan on the Belt and Road initiative of China, and whether it is green or actually not so green from your perspective. And second, interconnected questions, beside the natural resources from the West, China was also very much involved and interest in infrastructure development. Again, how this is true or not, if you have an answer, and how this is sustainable or not sustainable, because this is a colloquium on energy transition, right? So it's important to understand whether in the case study you are analyzing of Kazakhstan, and you refer to the relation with China and Russia, whether there is a way towards energy transition there beside what you have mentioned in the framework of this geopolitical relation. And we perfectly know what is going on in the world. So Europe is trying to transition from Russia dependency to Qatar dependency, but that's another story. So remaining on Kazakhstan and China, what is your opinion about all these issues? And then we give the floor to Imad for the other question of Professor Bakker. Thank you, Beibit.
Thank you so much for interesting question. I wouldn't be professional in answering, to be honest, to these questions. But from my point of view, when I worked with the European Union, delegation to Kazakhstan, I think the European Union is much more interested in infrastructure development, and I've never heard that the Chinese infrastructure. We wanted to build some kind of a road there in the city in Nur-Sultan to develop some infrastructure, but for us it was heavily burden was too much heavy. And so now we had to stop the contract with China. So we have them. I think in terms of infrastructure development, I think the European Union is the best example for us, more Western countries, European Union might be in comparison with others, because the others they are more interested in, I think, I'm not so much professional. I apologize for the for my answer, and I feel a little bit shame, but I think the direct investment, much more investment we get from the European Union. And so there's 70% of our oil goes to European Union. And so I think the EU can win in terms of development infrastructure. And it also gives a lot of the different projects related to rule of law, human rights, many others. But I've never heard that the Russians have such projects or the Chinese have such projects. I think Chinese, they do not, according to the rules, international rules of business, they are not interested. They don't make kind of as a condition human rights kind of condition. I mean, so they make investment if the country follows human rights, some of the human rights indicators. No, so. I can't say that Russia and China, they're interested in infrastructure development. I wouldn't say. And maybe we have some economic project. We have some economic project with Russia. It's a Eurasian Economic Union. I think Kazakhstan is mainly involved in Eurasian Economic Unions and Silk Road Initiative. It is. I think between all these three partners, the Eurasian Economic Union comes first, then comes the Silk Road Initiative. So we are simply market for I think for Russia in terms of the infrastructure. No, I have some doubts about it.
No, it's fine. It's fine. You feel you did not. You have replied to my question. You have made it clear, actually, to me at least, because that's what the answer I was expecting. Indeed, everything you have said, because there is indeed an interest for China and other countries, a focus on natural resources and infrastructure. It's just as another tool. It's not a priority. It's another tool for connecting with loans or contracts related to natural resources. So those infrastructure are sometimes just a tool. Yes, I can see you have a reaction. Yes.
Yeah, with European Union has a project on green economy. I know this is exactly kind of the special green economy, but it's not just kind of something extraordinary. It's sometimes it has a clause that to give them to create such infrastructure that ordinary people will be able to get the simple drinking water. So it is under umbrella of green economy, but it's a normal kind of means of subsistence.
Yeah, green economy, but also boosting human rights. So
So everything comes together. But when I worked in the oil field, they do not put water after extraction of natural resources. So I think that people, in general, when people get all these extra natural resources, they don't think about the consequences.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you very much. Thank you.
And also there were a lot of also for instance, Saipem is an Italian company. They simply put the water that used with chemicals. They put it into the drinking water of people. So all these cases should be selected. I mean, and all the contracts were signed for 30 years, for 40 years, and so usually with Africa, very much less developed countries usually sign such contracts. Such contracts are signed. So this is a tragedy, to be honest, for us. Because we have only 16 or 18 million of people, and I think the resources which have upper the soil is quite enough. It's the greediness of human being to get money, to be rich very fast.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I give the floor to Imad now for the response to the question of Professor Baker before taking another round of questions. Thank you.
Thanks for the question. That's an interesting one because I never thought of it. Like I never thought of it, but now you mentioned that, and I was trying to think out loud. The first idea that comes to my mind is that we would be extremely optimistic if we look at the Arab countries trying to prevent or provide their own review or reports on SDGs, taking into account the OECD guidelines, principles, and enterprises. That would be an extremely optimistic point of view concerning taking into consideration the Arab countries have their own goals. Majority of them are not democratic. They don't want to destabilize the system. So I don't see them in any way, shape, or form taking into consideration any kind of OECD principles or guidelines or enterprises, whatever you want to call it, in their provision of their reports. They would provide the reports to the best of their knowledge, maybe hiring some experts to draft the reports that they had Western ideas and stuff like that, and try to make it look nice, which if you read the reports, for instance, from other countries, from Gulf countries, they made it sound like as if energy transition will happen tomorrow here, which is not the case. Or if you go to like read other, like from, I don't know why, for instance, Tunisia focused a lot on sustainable consumption. Doesn't make sense because they have other problems to focus on within the SDGs, for instance, but they submitted an SD, like they really focus on that. Maybe it's because I'm not saying it's irrelevant, but in the great scheme of things for them, they have other more priorities, which they should focus on. So you could see sometimes that these countries are focusing on certain SDGs that are really important, but not at this stage because they don't want to focus on the main important ones. Why not considering the OECDs? Because you say OECD, so talk about transparency, accountability, and I don't think they have any interest in being transparent or accountable. So, I mean, I tried to be diplomatic, but that's the extent of diplomacy I can get in this regard. So,
thank you very much, Imad. Thank you very much. There are any further questions from the attendees, the participant? You can use the question and answer box. And for the other panelists, also with the next panel, if you have any question, please feel free. Go ahead, Martin. Dr. Martin Zvek from Masaryk University in Brno in Czech Republic.
Thank you very much.
The floor is yours.
Sorry.
The floor is yours, I only say.
Thank you very much. Both of your presentations were extremely interesting. I would like to ask Beibit. I was thinking about the nationality of the companies engaged in utilization of nature resources in Kazakhstan, and especially as regards Western European countries or American energy companies. They are used to conclude direct relationships with the local communities in different parts of the world. It's called social license to operate, and they do it very often in order to ensure that the local environment is friendly for their long-term investments. And I was thinking whether this is the case, because very often foreign investors making an investment in risky countries, they are not satisfied with having a green light from the government itself, because usually the government is not able to ensure that their investment is properly secured, and therefore they feel a need to get into even closer relationship with the local communities to ensure that their investment is not threatened by their opposition. So I was thinking whether this is the case also in Kazakhstan, and maybe whether the Kazakhstan can expect this kind of behavior from the Western European or American or Canadian energy companies, whether this is also reality in Kazakhstan. Thank you.
Yeah, I thank you for a question. I think we had one Canadian company, and they actually they had to leave the country, and instead of it, Chinese came. So it's for us, it's not a good kind of it's not a good policy, and we usually prefer to work in Western companies, because they have enough social security, they have social packages. But I never heard about that they can do something good for the local community, because one of the factors, I think, because the contracts between the country and these companies are closed and they are not open, and we can't say what kind of conditions there are. And I'm afraid that there are no such local things, because there are lots of disasters. You can't imagine, there are lots of problems there in the field. And yes, and I simply can say that when we have different options to work with Russians or to work with Chinese or to work with Western countries, we usually prefer to work with Western countries, because there are labor relations are much more secured. But I never heard about local investments to local communities, but it would be great. And at a legal level, I can't say that exists because the contracts are closed.
Mm-hmm. Just to add, they are usually engaged in parallel with both the government, because the government can provide them with the necessary license. Mm-hmm. But in parallel, they are engaged in negotiations with the local communities. This is very much common, for instance, in Latin America, where there are different indigenous peoples who are located within the parts of the region with significant natural resources. And for energy companies, it's much better to get into negotiations with them directly, in order to be sure that they are on their side, or they are fine with the conditions under which the energy resources or natural resources operations.
Yeah, I think this is I think the question of putting investment into local infrastructure or other kind of security, stability, etc. Most of time, I think it depends on the government which signed the contract, because it's a business, you know. For business people, it's good to get as much benefits as possible. So to make less inputs, it's kind of understandable. But all the responsibility, I think, lay on the shoulders of those who sign on behalf of the country such contracts. That is, I think, our president understands all these things, and so he's thinking about. He put an amendment that the natural resources belong to the people, not to the state, because state could be different than people.
Very good, very good. Thank you very much. Thank you, Martin, for these questions. There is any further question for the speaker? If not, I would have a question for Imad. The mechanism under the Sustainable Development Goals to review the commitment is, of course, an interesting approach to bring forward the objective of the international community. But the question is still public international law, or it's something else? And then, are we moving to a system where to reduce confrontation compliance is not assessed anymore, and new binding commitments are not on the agenda? Because that seems the risk, that it's based every time in compromise, negotiation, and politics, instead of treaties, international law, consensus. So yeah, what is your opinion about that?
That's a very dense question, so that we'll start to unpack it. Okay, the first part, whether it's still public international law or not. Well, the first question to ask, who must submit these mechanisms or these review reports? It's states who must submit these reports to the high panel of the SDGs. There is also another organization there working on that. So given the fact that it's a state who has to submit the reports, it pretty much remains public international law. and because it's a state to an organization relation. So this is on the technical side of this question, whether it remains public international law. The second part is of non-compliance mechanisms. If you have a look at the new conventions being adopted, so the Paris Agreement is one of them. This review framework is another one of them. There are I think there's the Aarhus Convention has a non-compliance mechanism, and constantly emerging international environmental agreements are having non-compliance mechanism. Is there a risk that we count on these mechanisms to implement international law instead of focusing on binding international law, resulting in a situation where it's more negotiation? Well, yes and no, because international law is deeply political in the first place. Whether we would like to assume that it's simply legal, it's not. It's a technical political instrument used to bound states to commit to certain ideas and obligations. So from the start, public international law is deeply political. So if we go from this perspective, the second question is, what's the place of these mechanisms in this entire new system? Well, the first question in this context is, do we need these mechanisms? And the response is yes, because binding commitments are not working for different reasons, mainly that states have different interests. And the only time where these kind of commitments work is when states, after doing the cost benefit analysis, there are more benefits from being bound by a treaty than actual costs. So in this reality, these instruments are seen as a techno-political, juridical means for the implementation of the agreement. So the risk is that too much focus on the instrument, but it can be seen from a different perspective in the sense that the instrument or the mechanism is used at the service of the convention. So in the case of this review mechanism for SDGs, as long as the framework is used and understood as it's being used for the service, at the service of the implementation of the SDGs, which are aspirational goals, then it's fine. The moment the focus shifts towards giving more importance to the review mechanism, then it's problematic, as everything taken to the extreme is problematic. So we have to strike a balance between using these non-compliance mechanisms as means to implement in the end goal, or like by the end of the day, binding commitments, and focusing too much on them as the end means. That's a question for the international community to respond, and at the question for others to actually try to strike a balance. Would we be able to strike a balance? We don't know it. We shall see.
Thank you very much. If there are any further questions, I will take them. If not, I think I can take my role of chair of the colloquium to close this panel for now. I would like to thank both the speaker, Dr. Imad Antoine Ibrahim, and Dr. Beibit Shangirbayeva for both your presentation, for your availability and kindness to respond to all the questions and comments who have been submitted to you during this panel. It's very much appreciated. And we have two more presentation, but I would probably suggest that, hoping that the participant will agree and will continue to stay here with us, to take a brief break of about, I would say, 10 minutes. So you have a little bit of time for stretching or take a coffee, and we will come back with Luigi Maria Riccardi, and Martin Zvek in 10 minutes. So thanks for the panelists of this panel. Those panelists who want to stay here with us, continuing the conversation, Dr. Ibrahim or Beibit, feel free if you have other commitments. Thanks again for your participation. And I would now give the break, and we can turn off our screen and audio and take the break. Thank you very much again, everyone. The second panel for the second day of the second Energy Transition Colloquium is about facilitating the energy transition, the EU perspective. This panel includes two presentations. The first one will be delivered by Luigi Maria Riccardi from University of Pisa, Department of Political Science, who will be presenting a paper on power to gas and green hydrogen in the EU, the energy transition between innovation and fragmentation. And the second speaker, I will introduce him afterwards. So I give the floor immediately to Luigi Maria Riccardi for his presentation. Thank you for being with us today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paolo. I first of all want to thank you to have accepted my proposal of intervention. So we already, to start in medias res, heard some points, some words about energy transitions in the world, as Imad said, in the MENA region. But the energy transition is a complex path, is a complex notion to understand. And most of all in a context like of European Union. But first of all, I want to start to say that the European Union is the first player as in international level, at a regional level, to promote the decarbonization and neutrality in the net zero emissions by 2015. And this complex path, and this complicated plan to work, the European Union has set several instruments to start to realize these objectives, to achieve these objectives. In this context, my intervention is dedicated to two elements which are present in the European Union Action Plan for the decarbonization and carbon neutrality by 2015. And these two elements, as Professor Farah introduced before, are on the one hand power to gas technology, and on the other the hydrogen strategy. First of all, we have to say that these two kind of elements are becoming very prominent topics in the European Union and in the debates for the realization of energy transition. This technology and the power to gas of power to X has acquired very popularity among experts, among scholars, because power to gas may be used for several for several objectives. One of these objective of power to gas, the most promising using of this technology is to transform the storage of surplus of electricity in the renewable energy. So in this context, and on the contrary, to transform the renewable energy into electricity. So the first question that we can make immediately in this kind of situation is to ask what is a renewable energy, and in which way the European Union may legislate, may rules this kind of energy. If European Union, whether or what extent the European Union has the norms, has the legal system to apply to direct to rules this kind of energy. In this context, the using of power to gas to transform via a water-based electricity into renewable energy create a sort of practical problems and legal problems. On the one hand, the practical problems are in particular evident on the fact that member states are different among them. Italy, from Spain, from Germany, from Portugal, they are very different from each other. So these differences is in particular in this case relevant because there are, for example, different investments on the renewable energy, different investments on the infrastructure which are dedicated to handle the renewable energy and the energy transformation, the energy transition in the context of the member states and the European Union. And the legal differences are mostly individuating in the fact there are some differences in the legislation of member states which is dedicated to the discipline of power to gas technology. In some member states, power to gas is absent because there's member states are not dedicated some of their efforts to implement this kind of technology because they are or part of these member states. Some regions of member states may be focused on the carbon emissions, using of energy. Another problem is individuated in the context of European Union legal order, because the European Union is based on two important treaties. One of them, the Treatise on Functioning of the European Union, dedicates in its Article 194 the elements to individuate the competences, the powers of the European Union and the member states in the context of energy. And in this kind of situation, also in the context of renewable energy. But the problem is this kind of competences, this kind of powers are shared between European Union and member states in an ambiguous way. There are no elements to individuate the harmony between the differences between the space of action of European Union and member states. So another questions may be individuated in the fact that when we talk about energy, we have to individuate a coordination mechanism between the power of the European Union and the space of action of member states. The second element on which we can focus the attentions is the hydrogen strategy, because this hydrogen strategy, the using of hydrogen is quite narrow in lots of member states. We have, for example, some different kind of hydrogen. We have gray hydrogen, blue hydrogen, and green hydrogen. When we talk about power to gas, we talk about a technology to produce green hydrogens, to produce hydrogen by renewable energy, by electricity, as not by carbon emissions. So the problems is also on the fact that in some regions of some member states, we can know about hydrogen. It's very expensive. And so also it's more expensive the fact that we for example, also in Italy, we have not some kind of infrastructures dedicated to the production of hydrogens. But for example, Italy is investing this power to gas in lots of ways, and one of these is the transformation of electricity in hydrogen, and on the contrary, the hydrogen into electricity. The legal problem is also the fact that when we talk about power to gas and hydrogen, green hydrogen in particular, we are talking about two different elements. On the one hand, we are talking about technology, and on the other hand, we are talking about gas. But we have a lot of questions to answer. The first question is in which way we can individuate this element in the rules existing in the European Union legal order. We have, for example, in this way, on the one hand, the electricity directive, since 2019, and we have the gas directive, which however is not reformed since 2009. In this way, also in this kind of norms, in this kind of directives, we cannot find out any words about power to gas, and we can use it to include the gas produced by power to gas in the application of these rules, because it's power to get the gas produced by power to gas is not natural gas, but is a renewable energy. So we have these differences between natural gas and renewable energy as renewable gas. So this is the first questions to answer. If there are some principles to be applied to not treat the gas produced by power to gas, sorry for the word in play, in these kind of situations. The second element is to individuate some different element, some different regulators to understand if power to gas and hydrogen may be merged in one single discipline. This is important because the European Union, with its strategy, and in particular with this clean energy strategy of 2020, is implemented the production, the efforts to the production of for the production of renewable energy. In these kind of situations, the key word of the strategy of the European Union is the integration. Integration not only of the on the one hand the technology and energy in this kind of situation, but the energy transition has to be supported, has to be settled on integration of the policy, of the norms which is applied on the one hand on the technology and the energy. Because to talk about the energy transitions is necessary, according to the new strategy of the European Union, to talk about an integrated path of energy, an integrated path of renewable energy in this kind of situation. It is not the time to create differences, to create the separation between technology and energy. If we this is the message of the new strategy of the European Union. If we remain to focus on the differences between these kind of norms, the energy transition is not possible to be accomplished in this kind of situation. Most of all, if we can use new technology to produce renewable energy and to not use carbon emissions or carbon-based technology to produce this kind of gas. There are some other important legal questions. If I tried to describe you, there are a lot of questions and a few answers in this research, because the European Union is starting now to create a concrete path to arrive, to accomplish, to achieve the decarbonization system, the decarbonization target. The first objective that we can on which we can focus the attention is the revisit of the current set of definition for major activities in the context of an integrated gas and electricity sectors. So the integration of these two worlds, the gas sector and the electricity sector, may or seems to be essentials to create the system, the legal system on which the powered gas and hydrogen may be put to accomplish the target of decarbonizations. From a legal point of view, the European Union legislations, besides, does not have any rules about powered gas installations. And as I described you in the beginning of the interventions, the installations, the few installations that we have in the member states may differ among each other when we come from a member state to another. The second problem is in the context of the energy transition. We have a lot of non-legal binding instruments. For example, the clean package on the renewable energy of 2020 is not a legal binding instrument, is a strategy, is a plan of action for the member states based on which the European Union may adopt, for example, directives. Directives are another problem for the European Union, because in the context of European Union legal order, directives are not binding in all these, in all its elements. The directive bind according the objective to perceive, to accomplish to, but not on the meaning, on the means to use by member states to arrive on these to these objectives. So it's create differentiations, these not uniformity among member states. And the European Union in a lot of cases remain silent on the not accomplishment of the directive and the execution of the directives in the energy context in the European Union. Furthermore, in the context of an integrated energy system, maybe it is necessary to individuate, to find out another definition of some important activities. One of them are dedicated to the network of gas and electricity. And the key point of this integration between gas and electricity sector may be the powered gas. technology. However, this is a snake, so it's not a very clear dimensions on the European Union legal order, but we have some important principles that we can use to put order in the complex of EU legal order, like, for example, the principle of non-discriminatory services. In this kind of in this kind of situation, to not discriminate between gases, for example, the renewable gas and natural gas may be essentials to arrive to achieve to the useful effect of the clean energy, the energy transition. So another important principle may be focused on the use, maybe individuating on the useful effect of the policy of the European Union, and also the policy of the European Union may be based on this kind of argumentation. Regarding the power to gas, another important question is to individuate some important differentiation between installations of power to gas, because we can have, as I said to you before, different installations, different way to interpret installation of power to gas. And this is quite important because in this kind of context, a very important link is between the state, in this case, the member state, and the private companies, because in a lot of ways, as for example, we have said before, and with the Ibrahim of Martin Zweck about the role of private companies. Also, in this case, the role of private companies may be very important because they invest on this kind of situation. So the inclusion of private companies, of private experts in the European Union legal process is very important to understand the potentiality of the norms and of the discipline in this kind of situations. I waste my time. Sorry, Paolo. How long it is?
I think it's time to conclude.
Okay, thank you very much. So to conclude briefly, I want to say that we have to argue that the European Union has the means to accomplish this objective. But the first, the core energy transitions must be dedicated to understand the instruments the European Union may use to act in this kind of context. So from hydrogen perspective, the core, the central thematic, the central questions must be dedicated to put an order, to put aside, for example, clean or blue or gray hydrogen, and to invest on green hydrogen, mostly through the power to gas technology. So we have to wait for new strategy plan, and to link with Martin Zweck intervention, probably a useful thing may be supported, may be withdrawn by the Repower EU. But I don't want to pass this. I want to pass this object to Martin Zweck, that I want to thank. Thank you, Paolo. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Luigi Maria, and we will have all additional time during the question and answer, so there will be plenty of time there to continue this very interesting conversation. Again, thank you very much for this thoughtful presentation. Thank you very much. I would like now to introduce to the next speaker, who is Dr. Martin Zvek from Masaryk University, School of Law in Brno, in Czech Republic. And Dr. Zvek will be presenting on Repower EU, EU's energy transition in the context of Russian aggression against Ukraine. So thank you very much, Martin, to be here with us. The floor is yours. You need to unmute yourself.
Thank you very much, Paolo. Is it better?
Definitely, yes.
And can you see the presentation, please?
Yes, we can see
Excellent.
it.
Wonderful. Good morning, good afternoon. My name is Martin Zvek, and I'm an assistant professor at the Masaryk University at the Department of Energy Law in the Czech Republic. And first of all, I would like to say that I'm very much grateful for having this wonderful opportunity to share with you some insights from the European continent, because I appreciate a lot the fact that the American university and the conference organized by the American universities do pay attention to what's going on the European continent on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean. Well, let me tell you that the European countries and the European Union is going through a very difficult time. And a lot of policies, including our climate and energy policies, have been questioned since the 24th of February 2022, when the Russian forces attacked Ukraine. And my today's presentation is going to be focused on the potential implications of the Russian aggression against Ukraine for the EU climate and energy policy, and more particularly on the EU's energy transition. Good. This is the outline of my presentation. In the first part of my speech, I would like to be focused on the EU, and I would like to emphasize the role of the European Union in the context of the global fight against climate change, because this is something what I do think should be very much underlined, because if the European Union is forced to slow down its climate ambition or change its climate ambition due to the Russian war in Ukraine, then immediately the whole global climate action would be affected as well, because EU, as you will see, was behind almost all climate change related milestones we have seen and experienced and celebrated since 1990s. In the second part of my presentation, I would like to make you familiar with what has happened in 24th of February 2020, and I would like to be focused on the implications of Russian war in Ukraine for the EU energy supply of energies. And in the last part of my presentation, I would like to discuss Repower EU plan, and this is the plan introduced a few weeks ago by the European Commission, and shed some light on how the European Commission would like to navigate EU through this energy crisis, and how the European Union would like to respond to Russian war in Ukraine from the energy perspective. So, well, let me begin with the first part of this presentation. EU as a leader in the global climate action, the European Union has been very much engaged in all these climate change negotiations since the 1990s. As you can see, shortly after the release of the first summary report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change in 1990s, the European leaders agreed to stabilize greenhouse gas emissions by the European community at 1990 levels by 2000. And the influence of the European Union can be seen in all these negotiations because the same target has been included successfully into the UNFCCC, which was adopted in 1992. You can see that the Article 2 includes the ultimate objective of the UNFCCC, United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. And the objective is to achieve stabilization of greenhouse gas concentrations in the atmosphere at a level that would prevent dangerous anthropogenic interference with the climate change. And consequently, Article 4 of the same convention established that Annex 1 parties, within the Annex 1 parties, both the European Community and all EU member states at that time were included. And these contracting parties were required to adopt policies and measures with the aim of returning their anthropogenic CO2 and other greenhouse gas emissions, individually or jointly, by the year 2000 to 1990 levels. Not surprisingly, the UNFCCC was ratified very swiftly by the European Economic Community in 1993. Here you can see what was going on on the European continent before the adoption of the Kyoto Protocol. Once again, the European Union was one of the strongest supporters of these negotiations and was a driving force of the negotiations, which led to the conclusion of the Kyoto Protocol in 1997. You can see that already in 1996, the European Community adopted its strategy on climate change. And already in 1996, the European Union defined what should be considered as a dangerous interference with the climate system. The global average temperature should not rise by more than 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. Yes, this 2 degrees Celsius we can find, for instance, in the Paris Agreement concluded in more than 20 years. The Kyoto Protocol of the European Union has committed to the highest absolute reduction target among the industrialized countries. So once again, the European Union as the leader, the absolute reduction target was 8% reduction of a basket of 6 greenhouse gases during the first commitment period. And we can clearly see that the EU was the first large political unit which endorsed a clear and action-oriented climate policy. The European Union was active on both externally and also internally. Here you can see how swiftly the European Union started with the implementation of the Kyoto Protocol commitments. I would like to emphasize that the Kyoto Protocol enters into force in 2005, but the European Union didn't wait until it entered force, until it enters into force, and already in 1998 lay down the specific individual targets for EU member states to reach the Kyoto Protocol objectives. It's been done through a burden sharing agreement. You can see that it redistributed the reduction target among the member states and set limits expressed in percentages by which member states must reduce, or also in some cases halt or increase. However, it was designed to accelerate EU climate policy and to achieve its international obligations and commitment arising from the Kyoto Protocol. What are internal key EU measures, or let's say tools to address climate policy? The European Union was one of the pioneers in establishing emission trading systems. This is the famous EU ETS emission trading system adopted in 2005. We have the directive adopted in 2003. I'm pretty sure that we have heard of this well-known tool to tackle climate change. It's built on the cap and trade principle. Very basically, there is a cap set on the total amount of certain greenhouse gases, and this cap is reduced over time so that total emissions fall. Within the cap, companies receive or buy emission allowances, which they can trade with one another as needed, and this ensures very much needed flexibility of the whole system, and it ensures that emissions are cut where it costs least to do so. It should be emphasized that not all sectors were covered by the EU ETS. You can see that However, the most polluting sectors were covered by the EU ETS since the very beginning, including power and heat generation, energy-intensive industry sectors such as oil refineries, steelworks, and production of iron, aluminium, metals, and so on and so forth. In 2008, the European Commission introduced a climate and energy package. This climate and energy package was adopted by the European Council in 2009, and this is also very well known. It includes 3 pillars: reduction of at least 20% in greenhouse gases by 2020, 20% share of renewables by 2020, and in 2010, 20% energy efficiency target was added as well. So 2020 by 2020. The second pillar of EU climate policy is the effort sharing decision. This aims to address sectors not covered by the EU ETS, such as transport, buildings, agriculture, and waste. The effort sharing decision sets forth binding annual greenhouse gas emission targets for all EU member states. And however, this is just only the binding. Only the targets are binding, and it's up to the EU member states how they are going to achieve these numbers. And the last, third pillar of EU ambition or action and effort to implement the Kyoto Protocol, besides the EU ETS, the effort sharing decision, that the EU realized that in order to succeed in achieving ambitious climate-related goals, the energy transition is inevitable. According to International Energy Agency, energy sector accounts for 3/4 of global emissions, and therefore it's unthinkable to pursue climate-related policies without addressing energy sector and without an effort to transform our economies based on fossil fuels to the economy based on renewable energy sources. The energy transition of the EU has always been built on directives on the promotion of the use of energy from renewable sources. You can see how the whole system developed. First directive adopted in 2001 included only national indicative targets, which were not binding. And since 2009, there are national targets for renewable energy for all EU member states, and also 20% EU average renewable energy target for 2020. A new directive was adopted in 2018 as part of the Clean Energy for All Europeans package. To further demonstrate the EU ambition and the role at the international arena, let me mention that when the Kyoto Protocol's first commitment period expired in 2012, the question was how to continue in tackling climate change. And the Doha Amendment was supposed to extend the application of the Kyoto Protocol beyond 2012. Unfortunately, important players such as Japan, New Zealand, or Russia, who participated actively in Kyoto's first commitment period, have not taken new targets. And the European Union remain almost the only superpower or important economy really pushing the Doha Amendment to succeed. Unfortunately, the Doha Amendment entered into force in 2020. However, another example of EU exceptionally strong position when it comes to climate action. Let me conclude that the EU applied Doha Amendment provisionally. It ratified it very swiftly, and although it was not in force, it applied it provisionally, as I've just said. And in 2015, the EU again is the key negotiator of the Paris Agreement, including well-known limit, our objective to limit global warming to well below 2 degrees, preferably to 1.5 degrees Celsius compared to pre-industrial levels. As you can see, in 2015, very swiftly, even before the negotiation started, or before the COP 21 started in Paris, the European Union was very active in submitting its intended nationally determined contribution to the of the EU and its member states, with a binding target of at least 40% domestic reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2030. So this is all we can theoretically lose if the European Union is forced by objective reasons to reconsider its climate policy. Just to conclude, the European Union's tools designed to effectively implement its international obligations arising from the Paris Agreement, Renewable Energy Directive, EU ETS, we already know all these instruments, binding annual greenhouse gas emission reductions by EU member states, and energy efficiency directives. These are the key pillars of the EU ambition, internal ambition, to succeed in tackling climate change. And in 2020, the last step in the EU effort is called the European Green Deal. It's a very complex list of different activities. The most complex energy/climate policy of the European Union ever adopted. In the European Green Deal, the European Commission acknowledged that the climate change and environmental degradation are an existential threat to Europe and the world. And to overcome these challenges, Europe needs a new growth strategy that transforms the Union into a modern, resource-efficient and competitive economy, where there are no net emissions of greenhouse gases by 2050, economic growth is decoupled from resource use, and no person and no place is left behind. The European Union aims to become the first climate neutral continent on Earth by 2050. So very ambitious goals, which have been significantly affected by what happened on 24th February 2020, when Russian forces launched a major assault on Ukraine. What are the key consequences? Of course, there are a ton of consequences. However, from the energy and climate perspective, it's important to emphasize that the Russian Federation was one of the most important exporters of energies flowing to European continent. Let me remind you of the fact that Russia provides more than 40% of EU's total gas consumption. I know that a lot of countries, especially the United States, emphasize that this is a risky move. Already in 70s, the United States criticized and warned the European Union that we should reconsider our energy policy, and pipelines going from transporting oil and gas from the Russian Federation, sorry, at that time Soviet Union, to the Western Germany can be used by the Soviet Union to blackmail the European Union. The United States were very loud in their warnings, but they were not listened to by the European Union. The same happened when it comes to the Nord Stream 1 pipeline. It has been built at the end. The same applies to Nord Stream 2 pipeline. The United States were very much worrying the European Union that this is a risky move, that the dependence on Russian natural gas and fossil fuels in general can, in the long-term perspective, undermine its energy security. However, the Europeans did it. On the other hand, let me say that we have significantly benefited from significantly low prices of natural gas. And let me say that in contrast with the United States, the European Union doesn't have enough fossil fuels for its own consumption. So the question is not how to make the European Union self-sufficient. The question is how to mitigate EU's dependence on imports of fossil fuels. Unless we are dependent 100% on renewable energy sources, the EU will always be dependent on supplies of fossil fuels, because, as I said, the European Union doesn't have enough energy resources for its own consumption. So what are the consequences of the war in Ukraine? First of all, there are energy security concerns. The EU identified its overdependence on oil, gas, and coal imports from Russia as energy security risk. And for the first time, the Western European countries relied that Russia is not, maybe should not be viewed only as a commercial partner, but as a country which may and is willing to do, if necessary, to use energy as a tool to pursue its foreign policy objectives. Second, the European Union realized that importing Russian fossil fuels, the EU effectively helps Vladimir Putin sustain its war against Ukraine. So the whole war and the Russian attack in February 2020 made energy situation in Europe very complicated and very difficult and very, very challenging, because and many analyses compare this situation with what we have already experienced in the 70s, when OPEC countries imposed an oil embargo on Western European countries and the United States. And however, I do disagree with these comments, because in the 70s, the key question was only how to replace one fossil fuel with another fossil fuel, how to replace one source of energy with another source of energy. Today, the thing is that the whole situation is much more complicated, because the energy policy of the European Union is not the only policy in place, and it is very much interrelated with its climate policy. To be precise, the European Union should not only think about how to ensure its energy security, but how to ensure its energy security without compromising its other policies, such as climate policy, and to be more precise, its ambition to pursue energy transition effectively. And this is the dilemma we are facing in the European Union, how to balance these two values, enhancing energy security on the one hand and energy transition on the other hand. On 8th of March 2020, the European Commission called for a rapid phase out of Russian fossil fuels and an acceleration of the European Green Deal and its communication Repower EU. And now I would like to make you familiar with some concerns raised by many analysts, politicians, and the whole Europe, that maybe the European Green Deal is dead. Maybe now it's time to reopen already closed coal mines. We thought that the coal is the source of energy of past, but the situation may force the European Union to once again refocus its energy mix, and to once again include coal within its energy mix. Just for information, there is a long list of European countries which already announced the coal phase out in upcoming decades. And this is one of the greatest dilemmas. On the other hand, as you can see, the European Commission does not only call for a rapid phase out of Russian fossil fuels, but also for an acceleration of the European Green Deal. So it seems, from the perspective of the European Commission's communication, Repower EU, the EU aims to keep its climate ambitions. What's interesting that this communication sets out new actions to ramp up the production of green energy, diversify supplies, and reduce demand. And this focus can be extended to phasing out dependence on Russian oil and coal as well. Here, let me make you familiar with the Versailles Declaration, and these are the key conclusions reached by EU leaders. And here you can also see the dilemma very clearly, because at the one hand, they have re-emphasized that over the past few years, the European Union has set ambitious targets to reach the objective of climate neutrality by 2050. But on the other hand, the EU works towards achieving that goal. The current situation calls for a thorough reassessment of how we ensure the security of our energy supplies. Let's see how the European Union materialized these tasks to go through and to think about how to navigate the European Union through this very uncomfortable situation. A few weeks ago, the European Commission introduced or announced several documents, including Repower EU Plan, quite complex document, setting forth details of the EU plan to go through the situation, then joint communication, EU external energy engagement in a changing world, European Commission's communication EU Solar Energy Strategy and the European Commission's communication EU Safe Energy. And if you go through all of these documents and plans and strategies, you can see that the energy transition is at the top of the list of measures to be introduced to address the situation. Quite interesting. If I may quote just a few sentences of these policies, we can significantly reduce our dependence on Russian fossil fuels already this year and accelerate the energy transition, building on the Fit for 55 package of proposals and completing the action on energy security of supply and storage. This Repower EU can puts forward an additional set of actions, as you can see, with acceleration of Europeans' clean energy transition among them. You can see that the green energy transition is the only way to simultaneously ensure sustainable, secure, and affordable energy worldwide. The EU Solar Energy Strategy says that massive, rapid deployment of renewable energy is at the core of the Repower EU plan, the EU initiative to put an end to its dependency from Russian fossil fuels. EU Safe Energy says saving energy, reducing energy consumption through price signals, energy efficiency measures, or voluntary efforts can often be the cheapest, safest, and cleanest way to reduce our reliance on fossil fuels imports from Russia. So it's quite interesting because if you look at the energy security definition of the International Energy Agency, energy security is the uninterrupted availability of energy sources at affordable price. And this is, I would like you to bear in mind when going through all EU documents, because the question is whether we can effectively replace Russian fossil fuels, accounting for a huge amount of our fossil fuels we do consume as soon as possible, without reintroducing our production of our own fossil fuels. And this is the question, whether the EU is forced to start investing in technologies and sources we thought we are not going to need in the near and especially long future. Whether whether it's wise, but maybe necessary to reopen our coal mines when having climate neutrality target by 2050 in our strategy. So this is the dilemma. I just would like to briefly mention several policy tools for energy security developed by the Energy Charter Secretariat. And here you can see what Repower EU addresses. You see the diversification is addressed by the Repower EU, security enhancement as well, stockpiling as well, demand control. But the key problem is supply expansion. As you can see, supply expansion measures can be applied to both domestic and overseas resources, and domestic resource development is one of the first policies that an importer might consider when aiming to mitigate energy insecurity. And this is what the European Union doesn't want to do, except usage or further acceleration of the reliance of EU on its own renewable energy sources, but not fossil fuels. Reintroduction of fossil fuel strategies is not mentioned in any of Repower EU documents. Is it sustainable? Is it enough? We will see. This is the dilemma the European Union is facing currently. And at the very beginning, I'm at the very end of my presentation, let me put two question marks, because there are a lot of uncertainties we are facing that can significantly change the path the European Commission has decided to take. First, supplies of Russian gas to the EU since February 2020. Let me tell you that the Gazprom has already cut gas supplies to Poland, Bulgaria, Finland, the Netherlands, and Denmark. And a few days ago, Gazprom has reduced maximum gas supply volumes to Germany through the Nord Stream 1 pipeline by 40%. So the question is, who is going to stop flows of gas to Europe first? EU, because we want to reduce our dependence on Russian Federation, or Russian Federation, in order to pursue its foreign policy objectives? That's the question mark. And if it's done by Russian first, then the European Union may be forced to reconsider its so far very much energy transition focused Repower EU plan, and to consider the role of our domestic fossil fuels for the purpose of replacing missing Russian fossil fuels which do still in 2021 and 2022 constitute a significant part of our energy mixes. And the second question mark, well, it's questionable whether such ambitious approach taken by the European Union is going to be accepted by the rest of the remaining organs of the European Union. And this is quite interesting. Happened last week, June 8th. The European Parliament, very often the most ambitious climate-oriented body in the European Union, failed to adopt one of the key components of Fit for 55 climate legislation package of the European Union, especially, or precisely, to be precise, expansion and revision of the emission trading system. Because there were a lot of amendments pushed by the center-right European People's Party, which would have resulted in weaker emission cuts than proposed by the Environment Committee and delay the phase out of carbon credit. So we can see that there is the action taken by the European is not well coordinated. On the one hand, the European Commission supports even more ambitious plans in order to reduce our dependence on Russian gas and oil and coal. But on the other hand, there is the European Parliament, one of the key organs of the European legislative process, having doubts whether such ambitious plans are to be adopted, taking into consideration rising prices of energy in the European Union, and so on and so forth. So this is the end of my presentation. Thank you very much for the attention. It's a very exciting time to study energy law in the European Union in these days, and I'm pretty sure that very soon we will see further development of the EU energy and climate policy. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Martin, for your presentation. We have about I believe at least 30 minutes for question and answer. If you would stop to screen share so we can move back. And I would open the floor to everyone questions from the other speaker, from the panelists. I see that there are already few questions on, even by you, Martin. So in order, I will give the floor first to Imad, then to Larry, then to Luigi Maria, and then to Martin. So please, thank you.
Thanks a lot. So I have a question for Luigi Maria and a question to Martin. I enjoyed both presentations. My question to Luigi Maria, you're talking about energy transition between innovation and fragmentation. I was curious about, because we all know that energy transition and renewable energy has, despite being seen or conceived as something good, it has plenty of negative externalities witnessed with it. How does that is being impacted within the EU or in general when you're doing research? Have you ever noticed certain regulations or ways or policies that are trying to deal with these negative externalities in the context of the fragmentation of energy? Because the externalities of, let's say, wind power is different than turbines, than solar energy. So I was just curious to understand whether you've seen something on this aspect, more or less. I don't know if the question makes sense in this regard. For Martin, I know your presentation was more legal, but I have political questions, sorry. So, do you see in a way or another, so you have Russian aggression against Ukraine, you've got the EU with the entire legal package. Do you potentially see potentially association agreements, the EU making potential new association agreements with countries in the context of their neighborhood policies that before were not being concealed in this regard, in the sense that they had strategic relations, but they would not include strategic provisions concerning oil and gas transfer or oil and gas trade, for instance, in countries like Qatar, because they have the highest gas, like the third natural gas in the world. So do you see a sort of a mechanism being established where this is sort of started to shape or take form within the EU to respond to the Russian aggression to Ukraine and try to not to be dependent on the Russian gas? Thank you.
I would like probably to suggest that we collect also Larry questions. So you need to take notes for the question, Larry and Luigi Maria, and also yourself, Martin, for question for the others. So then you maybe can match some of these questions and connect the dots. Thank you.
Okay, I just want to build on Imad's question. It is my understanding that Ursula von der Leyen and the Italian Prime Minister will be visiting the MENA region, Israel, Palestine, and the like, and they are shopping for that vast new source of, now someone's smiling, that vast new source of natural gas with possible pipelines through Cyprus. And so I've got two questions. One is, to what extent is it likely that that what we're going to be seeing is not a pressure, not a Russian pressure so much as buying time so that there's a diversification of natural gas, but not a move towards energy transition, rather a pivot from Russia down to MENA, which then may affect the MENA arrangements with the EU. And then my second question, which builds on that, might this also suggest, since it's the Italian Prime Minister who's been dealing with this, and there have been tensions in the Union, a kind of split between the northern, a kind of north-south split with the southern Roman part of the EU now much more vigorously pursuing a Mediterranean diversification project, and the northern part of the EU considering different alternatives, and to what extent will that have an effect on both petrochemical policy and the policies of energy transition?
Excellent. Luigi Maria, you want to take the floor for your question as well?
Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the questions. First of all, Imad, so thank you for your suggestions and for your questions. So we have to start talking about that. We have not rules on the power to gas and hydrogen specifically. But we have also a plan of action, not Italian plan of action, but of the European Union. So the problem is that we have a lot of criticalities when we talk about to bring these plan of actions and to take it into our country, because in Italy, for example, we have a lot of regions, we have a lot of differences, so we have a lot of issues to bypass to create a uniformity of investment in power to gas and hydrogen. In this context, I had not ideas. Surely I want to confess you what are the major or the most prominent paths to follow up. I guess that it is important to take into account a bottom-up and a strategy to participate to the European Union plan of action. There are a lot of criticalities, practically talking, like the conflict between Ukraine and Russia, as explained by Martin, because in this context, before the conflict of Ukraine and Russia, in this kind of situation in which member states may benefit of the gas supplies by Russia, this kind of situation of energy transition, energy transformations was not very appreciated. But in the meaning of the necessity, obviously the mind is changed. The problem is that Italy and other member states have not the instruments to apply immediately to receive all the to receive the instruction, practically talking, by the European Union. And in the context of power to gas and hydrogen, we have not a lot of studies on this thematic. Power to gas is a new technology, existed in from several years, but power to gas is implemented only now, only from this moment, in the moment of necessity, because with the conflict between Ukraine and Russia, with this international crisis, it is an international crisis. It is the moment in which member states with the European Union as a single player has to invest on this kind of new link between energy and technology. I entitled my intervention Innovation and Fragmentations for these reasons, because we are in front of an innovation of changing, so the power to gas, and we have at the same time in front of a fragmentation of policy, a fragmentation of rules, a fragmentation of the European Union law, because the European Union law is not performed to this stage, and also the member states have not the expertise to accomplish this element. But we have in the European Union some element to use in favor of this changing. And one of these may be to start with, for example, as I try to explain to you, with the integration of policy in our context, to cut these differences between innovation and the space between innovation and fragmentation, to show this distance between these two kinds of dimension.
Excellent. I would open up now to the responses. Martin, if in the meanwhile you respond, you also ask your question. That will be perfect as well. I think that probably we will start with the question of Larry, then Imad, then you, Luigi Maria. But again, we can follow the order. So I would ask Imad to start, to respond to the question were addressed to him. Then Luigi Maria and Martin, brief responses, okay? So we can have more rounds of questions or brief points, because there might be additional comments. Thank you. Imad, are you okay?
Sorry, I had to go fast because I had an emergency. Can you please repeat the question?
I give the floor then to Luigi Maria if you want to respond to the other question you received before.
Because I had a call. Apologies for that.
No problem. Luigi Maria, would you like to take the floor? Or Martin, maybe. Martin, Martin, go ahead.
Thank you very much. Excellent questions. Let me begin a little bit broadly. I know that Paolo asked me to be brief. One of the measures, very effective measures mentioned in almost every energy security guide is the supply expansion. This is the easiest way how to address any energy security. But the European Union, in the European Union and the United States, it's not that easy, which may experience in the which we have experienced in recent months, because in the US and in the European Union, we have states have privatized their energy sector and liberalized the sector, and it's up into the business decision of the CEOs of energy companies whether or not to expand their oil or gas production. And the United States are a very nice example when the US president has to ask energy companies to boost their production. From the energy company perspective, it's also very questionable because the European companies are under the extreme pressure to implement SDGs criteria and to tackle CO2 emissions as soon as possible. But now they are in the situation that maybe some investments may be worthy, but who knows what's the EU long-term or mid-term strategy. And do not forget that the energy investments are usually long-term, and they may theoretically benefit from these investments in the short-term perspective, but in the long-term perspective and mid-term perspective, taking into consideration the EU long-term policy and its ambition to become a climate-neutral continent, it's questionable whether these companies would find these investments and extended production as responsible business decision. When it comes to the questions, and that's the reason why the European Union shifted its focus on regions where the companies are somehow connected with the states, and where the companies are not under such pressure as in the United States and Europe. And it's very interesting because this is something what I wanted to ask Imad as well. What's the position of Qatar in relation to the urgent need of the European Union to expand its gas production? Because I don't know whether you have noticed it, but when the German foreign ministry, Minister of Foreign Affairs, he very shortly after the war in Ukraine started, he visited Qatar, and he had two proposals. The one was to expand Qatar's gas production, and the second proposal was to help Qatar with their energy transition. And I cannot imagine that the European Union is very tough with these regions when it at the same time needs expansion of their fossil fuels production, because the European Union doesn't want to do it within its own territory. And that's for me very fascinating policy, and I would like to see what Qatar thinks about these proposals, because if this country wants to be strictly following SDGs and its climate related objectives, these proposals made by the European Union should be denied. And when it comes to Europe and its focus on Norway or Mediterranean, I think it's just a few days when the Israeli and definitely Israeli minister we signed an agreement with the European Union with about some intention to boost the energy cooperation with these two regions, with Egypt, Israel, and Europe. There are a lot of ongoing negotiations, not very much coordinated, because some negotiations are led at the European level. A lot of negotiations are taking place between representatives of EU member states and respective energy producing countries. So for me, this development is very messy, and I do not see a proper role of the European Union in the coordination of these policies. On the other hand, we should not forget that the European Union has no competence over the energy mixes of the respective EU countries. So it's a very, very difficult environment, and the legal framework does not give the European Union the upper hand in this situation. And it very much reminds me of what happened during the COVID pandemic, when the European Union had even more difficult position when it comes to its competences. So it's constant balancing between what should be pursued by EU member states and what should be pursued by the European Union.
I guess I'm going to reply.
Yes, absolutely, Imad. I wanted to give you the floor indeed. Thank you very much.
Just to know that previous questions were also in this context of Larry, just to reply to everything at the same time, because sorry, I was on the phone, so I could not hear the question. So the previous questions were in this context as well, so just to know.
Yes, actually, Martin has achieved his response and has prepared the floor for you. So if you reply to the question of Martin, I think you will be fully responding to the previous issues as well. Thank you very much.
All right. This is interesting for the single reason that now we are in the process of co-editing a special issue on energy transition in the MENA, including Qatar, and what should be done in this regard, and what are the current processes taking place here. And in the case of Qatar or the Gulf countries, they have a dilemma between shifting towards renewables, but at the same time securing their only source of economic growth, which is oil and gas. So what is happening is diversification of economy. These countries are doing investments abroad, and they acknowledge that there's a problem here. On one hand, they have to secure their position. On the other hand, they have to ensure the energy transition. In the case of Qatar, you could see that the country is also playing a role as a, like, I would say, the Switzerland of the region, not in terms of the country, but in terms of mentality, in the sense they're trying to be the neutral part between the East and the West. And like that's what happened in Afghanistan. That's how they also tried to help in the situation of Russia. So at the policy making level and being in the country, they have a clear understanding of the need to strike a balance between both objectives, which is extremely hard to do. And at the same time, I could see, so I go out with European officials here, and they're trying to have the same conversation and to see how to strike a balance. On the other, so at the other side of the European counterpart, it's not easy also to understand how they need to proceed with this. If I would want to think about that practically, well, it has to be some sort of exchange. So what do the Gulf countries want? They want to make sure that by the time oil and gas is gone, they have actual swift renewable energy transition. This is the kind of technical know-how and knowledge and expertise that Europe can provide. What the Europeans want now, it's energy security, given the situation with Russia and not being dependent on Russian gas and oil. So that is something Gulf countries or countries like Qatar can provide. So practically and pragmatically here, I'm trying to be extremely as pragmatic as possible. A sort of agreement, where it's a give and take, a win-win situation for both parties in terms of provisions, where the EU will have to sort of stop addressing using carrots and sticks in terms of certain values that they have, like usually, and be more pragmatic like the Chinese, because that's how the Chinese strike deals in the region, addressing, especially in the Council of the Belt and Road Initiative. They focus on the economic ideas, not considering other aspects like human rights or something else. So if that's the way to go, that's the way to go. The question is the EU ready to adopt this kind of soft power / binding agreements once it's time to do that? I have no idea. I'm not there, so I don't know what's the atmosphere within the European Commission in this regard. Are they willing to take this step further and be more pragmatic than ideal?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. If there are no further questions, I had actually several ones. I just want to mention some of them. For example, for Luigi Maria, I was thinking that the rush to hydrogen is also at the center of the energy policy of both China and the US. So even though the objective of the transition are global, they're definitely global, we are witnessing a transition that is mostly taking place at the regional level with very little or no cooperation among the blocs. So this cooperation and multilateralism are retreated in that sense, and more confrontation is happening. So in the case of the hydrogen, the EU policy is cooperating with other actors or not. So that would be for Luigi Maria. I would have also others, but some of the questions I wanted to ask, they have been in a way or in another addressed by the other speakers. I would have actually a concluding question that it's open for all the speakers, and that would be, I think, the last questions to be able to conclude the session. would be the second energy transition conference has been focusing very strongly on both local and global perspective. But I would like that the panelists address a definitory issue. Based on your excellent presentation, how would you define energy transition? So we have been talking about these topics from different angles, but from a definition point of view, how would you define energy transition? What does it mean, energy transition? Energy transition for who, what, and how? So that would be a question for all the remaining speakers here. And I would be very thankful to hear from each one of you. And thanks again. I would like anyone, Martin, maybe you would like to start, and then Luigi Maria, and then Imad. And you, when you, Luigi Maria, you respond, you can respond also to the other question I mentioned.
Okay, as you like, Martin. Thank you, Paolo. As you like, Martin. You the floor.
This is an extremely broad question, and in my opinion, it's so complex that the Western Virginia University will have to organize the third or the fourth energy transition colloquium. In my opinion, if I may build on what I have concluded or emphasize in my presentation, it appears that energy transition, which I do define as a transition of a society very much reliant on fossil fuels to society with economy relying on renewable energy sources, is even more complex than we thought, because and let me take the European perspective. The energy transition was part of the EU climate and energy policies since, as you could have seen, since 90s. And when the energy union was adopted in 2015 in the European Union, a strategy of the European Union, very complex, the first complex energy / climate policy, very interrelated approach, or holistic, if I may, holistic approach to tackle both energy and climate related issues. The EU realized that the EU citizens should be at the center of this policy. And since 2015, when the energy union was adopted, we can see a significant shift of attention of the European Union on not how to make it technically possible, because these issues were addressed previously, but now, or how to create legal framework to facilitate greater penetration of renewable energy sources into the grid. That the EU realized that it has to shift its attention to EU citizens and to ensure that this policy is acceptable for them and especially affordable. Therefore, since 2015, we can see in many EU energy-related and climate-related documents the focus on just transition. Now we can see that the energy transition doesn't have to be only just, but it has to take into consideration energy security needs. Because, and it was my intention that energy security concerns, if they are not properly balanced with the energy transition, may at the end of the day undermine the energy transition itself. Because it has been mentioned in many debates in the European Union that, well, when the coal is the only source of energy we have, then the fact that it's the most polluting fossil fuel we have is less relevant, because we need it for running our own economies. And it seems to me that the energy transition, since, at least from the European perspective, since 2020, should have three key pillars, one including the energy transition and how to make it technically, how to make it, how to balance the grid, These were the talks we have started already a decade ago. Demand response, flexibility measures, storage systems, hydrogen, power to gas, power to X. All of these technical issues are extremely important to make the energy transition of future technically possible. The second extremely important concern is how to make it just and how to ensure that no one is left behind, because there is a very strong narrative within citizens that the dirty fossil fuels are still cheaper than the renewable energy sources, and we either have to tackle this narrative or to make sure that they do not have reason to, or to provide them with some assurances that the energy transition is going to be just. It will be, I have no doubts that the energy transition is going to be just since 2040 and in 2050. And in 2050, it's going to be a joke that there were times when electricity produced in a coal-fired power plant was cheaper than the electricity produced by renewable energy sources, because of the initial investments we are required to do now, and which we have already lost, that we have made when it comes to most of the fossil fuels. And from the perspective of new infrastructure to be built. And the third and last, and now it seems to me very important pillar, is that our energy transition does not, especially in this transitory period, does not undermine our energy security. At the end of the journey in 2050, when we are climate neutral, energy security won't be an issue at all. But how to ensure that during our path to 2050, our energy security is not undermined? So it seems to me that the energy security, to be widely accepted by the population and to be successful, should take into consideration these three dimensions equally. And maybe we have forgot that the energy security is still an issue in the European Union, and therefore we are worried that we may face a backlash and the whole energy transition process is slowing down.
Thank you, Martin. Luigi, Maria.
Thank you, Paolo. Briefly, I want to answer your question. As you introduced yesterday in a conference, this is neither global nor local perspective. It is quite local perspective of energy transition. So I want to use this word of yours to introduce my answer. The European Union, as I said before, has to play as a single international actor in this kind of situation. The problem is with who is necessary to contact, is necessary to create relationships or to prolongate relationships. So, for example, maybe in the context of hydrogen, and in particular of green hydrogen, maybe the European Union can create more stronger relationship with the United States of America, and most of all with the United States expertise on this thematic. So maybe the European Union can create international relationship, but also with international agreement. The problem is that the path to arrive to an international agreement of the European Union, you know better than me, that is very difficult. So maybe it is not a path to work on also only on the legal perspective, but maybe it is important to work on political instruments, and maybe on a more flexible instrument to use, not legally binding for the member states. And in lots of cases, in the context of European Union, maybe a role to create an international relationship may be given to the solidarity principle that can create a link between among member states. The problem is that we can have some member states that can create international relationship with other third states. So we have other member states which can not to have this kind of relationship. And as Martin said, there are different powers in the energy sector, different powers, different competences. To pretend to handle this situation with a legally binding instrument is very difficult, but with a strategic plan as REPowerEU, as the clean package of the European Union, or as the involvement of the private companies, most of all the great private companies in the sector of technology, the innovation, maybe the European Union can create international relationship and to learn some elements to use for the development. But there are a lot of juridical and practical issues on this kind of stage. So it is important to have a long sight and not forgotten to have the eye on the work, to not fallen during the path. Thank you very much.
Imad, it's your turn.
That's a very dense question you asked. It's like a multitude of questions in one question. What is energy transition? Well, the first question we need to ask is, what's the objective of energy transition for a country? Let's say a country tomorrow wants to adopt a policy of energy transition. Why? What's the purpose of it? Is it to fight climate change? Is it to shift from fossil fuels? Is it to simply adopt a new way of energy for the country, knowing that there are many other challenges facing for various reasons? That's the first question. Once we reply to the first question, then we can understand whether that country itself can reach a proper energy transition or not. If the only purpose of energy transitioning is to get rid of fossil fuels, that's a different motive than fighting climate change or other motives. And based on the motive or the idea, that would impact whether a state can reach actually the energy transition or not. So that's the first thing we have to understand. What's the purpose? Why does a state want to reach this energy transition? Based on that, then we could assess, is this mentality, is this purpose enough or sufficient to push all the levels of all the administrations of all the states, of the state itself, to shift towards energy transition? That's the second question. Based on the response we provide, then we will understand whether practically it's possible for that particular state to move away to renewables and a new way of thinking about society. Because it's not only about energy or energy transition. Energy transition is only one part of a big equation of economic cycle, if we discuss or like circular economy, because there are other factors, elements must be taken into consideration. So we need a shift in mentality that goes far beyond energy transition towards an entire transition in the mentality of the way society functions. Are we there yet? I don't think so. We speak about it, policymakers speak about it, but no one is tomorrow in an urgent rush to move from fossil fuels to renewables. Nobody tomorrow is shifting his car or changing the, I mean, some are doing that with Tesla in the US for sure, or other places, but it's the ultra rich who has that kind of money. But there isn't like an actual policy in many places in the world to go there. So if I get back to let's say to the main question, what is energy transition? I would reply, it depends. The definition would depend on each state's purpose and tailor-made need of the idea of why it needs to transition, taking into consideration its capacity and technical know-how. Otherwise, but I cannot provide a one answer fits all because it's not possible.
Thank you very much, Imad. I think we need to continue this conversation for future workshop and future conferences. So it will give us the opportunity to continue. And as you mentioned, we have also ongoing publications. One of the past events that we have organized was published on Oxford University Press Journal of World Energy and Business. You are also editing a new special issue for the same journal. We have books forthcoming, books in preparation, articles for journal. So there is a lot of going on, and so the conversation will continue in different outset with Martin at the European Society of International Law, the Interest Group in International Environmental Law, with Imad, with the American Society of International Law, with Qatar University, the Center for Law and Development, all supporting institution for this second day of the second colloquium on energy transition. So it's an ongoing conversation, and I hope it will continue to for the next years to come. So I appreciate all participation of every speaker this today and yesterday, and I thank everyone and also the participants for attending. This will be a recording that will be made available as soon as possible after editing by the university, and it will be then publicly available. Again, thank you very much. Thanks for the participants. If the speaker would like to stay just one more moment, we'll let the attendant to leave and we stop the recording. Thank you.